A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. We begin in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Maz, and I'm your host for Ramadan Is Young, and welcome you to another episode. Today, the topic I wanted to cover is something that we've already, entered into these last 10 days, and is the last Ashr, the last 10 days, and how in the hadith that we've been covering, dealing with this issue, in the last 10 days, this was a sign for basically aspect of the salvation from the fire. And we covered the first 10 days dealing with mercy, the middle 10 days dealing with forgiveness, and now the last 10 days dealing with salvation from the fire. And so, in a nutshell, we're just going to speak about some small points, keep it brief. I don't want to lose your attention. And, I start with this idea that of the story that I read some time back in a book of Muhammad al-Ghazali. And the story was about a monk. And what had happened was that this monk, he had devoted himself almost entirely to the worship of Allah. And for 60 years, he kept in his temple and devoted his worship and ibadah solely for the sake of Allah and Allah alone. And one day he looked out and he seen the rolling fields of grass, the shining sun, the graceful wind. And he said to himself, subhanAllah, I never really went out and enjoyed all these ni'mas, these blessings from Allah. Why not go out and remember Him, through what He has blessed us with? So he decided that he was, bake 2 loaves of bread just in case he got hungry, and he headed out. And as he's going and he's traveling outside, he remembers Allah and he's making dhikr. And he comes across a woman in the fields. And the woman, he gets to talking, because he didn't have much interaction while he was devoting himself in the temple, in the house of Allah, where he was worshiping Him. And so, as a saying goes in Islam, that, between a man and a woman, the third is shaitan. And in the same manner, this man's talking, one lead thing led to another, and eventually he ended up sleeping with her, right there in the field. And and they slept, and he woke up and he realized his error. So he said to himself, the first step, Tawbah, I need to cleanse myself, purify myself. So he went to a nearby lake and he started to perform his purification. And in that process, a beggar came upon him, and the beggar said, do you have anything, fi sabilillah, that you can give for me, for the sake of God? Give me something, whatever you have. And so the man said, look, man, I'm a monk. I don't have any money. I'm a poor monk. He said, but you know what? I got 2 loaves of bread. You can have them. And the beggar, he took the 2 loaves of bread, thanked him, and went on his way. And in that moment, Allah took his soul. He took the monk's soul in that moment, and He brought him before Himself, and He said, bring the mizan, bring the balance, and start weighing his deeds. So then they placed his 60 years of devoted service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala onto the scales, and the good outweighed the bad. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, put his one act of zina, fornication, adultery onto the scales. And they did. And the bad outweighed the good. And there's a little subtle lesson in there, in that, here this man was worshiping Allah for 60 years of devoted worship. And then all of a sudden, when he was challenged in life in a practical matter, that didn't prove him any benefit. And here his one act of zina, it totally shifted the balance. And there's one angle you can look at it there. Of course, another angle is that zina is such an abominable crime that one should try to avoid. It's one of the most serious crimes. But in a greater light, if you look at it in that angle, is that, all his 60 years of worship didn't prove him nothing. And we spoke about a hadith about that earlier, about the two women. And so, anyways, going forth, then Allah says, you know what? Put his two measly loaves of bread he gave in charity onto the scales. And they did. And the good outweighed the bad. And subhanAllah, he was entered into paradise as a result. And we take the lesson in that story that the salvation that man had was with two measly loaves of bread. And there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that says, do not look upon any deed as insignificant, for even a smile to your brother is charity. And subhanAllah, this is an example of that in this story. That, these measly two loaves of bread, that was, you would think is nothing. It was really our pathetic small deed. Here, in the sight of Allah, as a result of that, brought him salvation by Allah's will. And we think about that and you reflect on some other hadith and sayings of the Prophet. For example, the Prophet ﷺ said to Muslim women, he said, "O Muslim women, no woman should look upon sending a gift to her neighbor as mean, as anything little, even if it be a hoof of a goat." And this is in Sahih Bukhari. Then he also said in another hadith, he said, save yourself from the fire. This is the salvation from the fire, from Jahannam. Save yourself from the fire of hell, even if it be by giving away a date or by uttering a good word. And this is also narrated in Sahih Bukhari. So we look to these things and look at that no good deed should be considered insignificant. Because that could be the very deed that brings you the salvation from the fire. And that is one important aspect when it comes to the Islamic understanding of salvation, is that we will be provided salvation, partly so in respect to our a'mal, according to our actions and deeds. Because in Islam we have a two-pronged approach. We have an emphasis on creed and deed. Okay? We have an emphasis on creed and deed. And this is a stark difference from, let's say, the Jews and the Christians. The Christians, for example, don't have, in general, I'm saying in general, Christian communities, don't have an emphasis on deeds. They have emphasis more on creed. What do they say? You hear it all the time. Just believe in Jesus and you'll make it, right? And we can disagree on the creed aspects and the aqidah issues. That's a separate issue, but I'm just speaking about it in general. That they don't emphasize much on deeds. They emphasize mainly on creed. And they say, oh, you come in and you do so many Hail Marys and this and that, and on a Sunday morning, and that's it. Your 6 days of sin is just washed away. And because there's not much emphasis on action. I remember actually reading a pamphlet, because the missionaries, they're out to do their work, and it was a very interesting pamphlet. It had like a stick figure of a person going through different things. I think it was Joyce Myers. Most of you, if you haven't heard, she had a little thing to influence people to embrace Christ and so forth. So in this pamphlet, it shows about a person, it's showing you, and you're going through the thing, and at the end it says, if you obey God and Isa alayhi salam, Jesus and his teachings, right, you'll go to heaven. And even if you don't obey God or Jesus' teachings, you still go to heaven if you believe. And it was actually a very unique thing, and it was very confusing, to a common sense person, that how in the world can you say that if you don't follow, you don't obey, you don't do good deeds, that you're still going to somehow make it just basically solely on the fact of believing. And this is emphasis in Christianity, that they influence too much on creed, and there's very little on deed. In general, like I said, Christian. And in Judaism, it's the opposite. They emphasize more on deeds than they do on creed itself. And, if any of you know about the Jewish tradition of books, they emphasize the 613 mitzvot, which is 613 actions that they say a person should, commit to, for example, I'm trying to think of it. It's just good acts. dealing with your parents, dealing with the life. Emphasis on acts, 613 specific acts. And they have a strong emphasis on that, so much so that they go into even the small details of a thing, like if this plate becomes dirty and they can't use it because blood of a certain animal or meat of a certain animal touched it, there's a certain way to go about washing it. You wash it 7 times like this and let it be dried like this and this and that. And it has to be all perfect, all deeds, in order for it to be pure. And that's a very unique aspect that they emphasize on deeds. And Islam is, of course, the middle way. And so we have an emphasis on deeds that we discuss, that even the smallest of deeds can be significant by Allah's will. And I say that, and we say that all the time, because that's the aspect of our creed. Because salvation is only brought by Allah. And this is one of the things that, the second part of what I wanted to discuss is dealing with Allah in this aspect of salvation. Truly, salvation is only through Allah, and there is nothing else. Even the good deeds that we do, it is by His will that it is accepted. Basically, we need to look at it that, for example, the saying of the Prophet ﷺ, where he said, even he himself will not be granted paradise through his own actions. It is only by the mercy of God. Because whatever we do, whatever you can imagine a person doing, he always will fall short of what he owes to Allah. And that is something that honestly is the truth. Because even if Prophet ﷺ cannot make himself, based solely on his deeds, worthy for entrance into paradise, then who are we? Right? Who are we? And because this is a two-pronged thing, with deed and with creed. So our actions cannot get us there by itself, but what they do is they make us worthy for Allah for consideration into Jannah. And that is the important part. Another aspect I wanted to cover related, since we covered the Jews and Christians, is indeed Allah is the sole source of salvation, like I said. And often at times, sometimes that can get mixed. And unfortunately, this type of sickness has entered into Islam too, and we have this concept of saint worship, especially in a lot of countries overseas, where a lot of old traditions have been mixed in, particularly with the other cultures that used to reside there before Islam. Particularly we look at South Asia, where this concept of saint worship has come into play, where great men, great Muslims of the past, were remembered for their good deeds and actions and teachings of the people. And later on, their teachings and basically schools were watered down and mixed in, and then people started referring to them as ways to salvation. And this is incorrect. This is shirk. This is associating partners with Allah. This is associating that our salvation is through something or someone. And this is not true. And this is completely against Islam, and something we need to be careful about, and something we need to keep other people aware about, that hey, sometimes don't think salvation resides in something or someone, and often at times we ourselves need to catch ourselves that from saying something wrong like that. Oh, it was because of this that this happened. No, it is by Allah's will. Even whatever we do is by Allah's will. He gave you the opportunity. He allowed it to occur. And it's a deep discussion I want to get in, that we can get into on that, and I'm not really going to concentrate on that, but I want to just point this out, that salvation is through Allah and Allah alone. It is not through an intermediary. It is not through some faqir or some saint or some pir, and these were great men of old. Most of them actually were very respected, great Muslims who followed Quran and Sunnah. And if you read any of their original works, they emphasize following Quran and Sunnah. It's just later on people took their teachings and watered them down, and basically took it to a new level. And that is what we have to be careful about, because even Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, he explains that the concept of idolatry entered into the people because they made statues to remember the good people of old. to remember the good people of old. And in order to remember them, they made these statues and stuff, and it ended up worshipping these statues throughout time and the degradation. That's why, it tells us to stay away from making life-like objects. In Islam, we don't, we have a dislike in staying away, and it's haram, frankly, to make statues and these type of things, is because it can eventually lead to a greater fitna at a later point. And so Ibn Abbas, he mentions this, that this is the reason why people fell into idolatry. It just got watered down, and shaitan came, and through whispers and whispers over time, things became muddled, and then things getting corrupted, and next thing you know, the people started worshipping the statues and forgot what was the reason they built them. It was to remember these good people so they could remember themselves, he was a good man. You look at all the traditions, everywhere you go, do enough research, and I've done a lot. Like I said, this topic is expansive. Like Osiris, for example, in Egypt. Everybody knows about Osiris. Osiris is really an Egyptian general that was remembered by the people for his glorious victories. And later on, they started worshipping him as the god of the dead. Most of you, I don't know if you knew that, but study their history. Hercules, in the Greek tradition, he was a man he performed miracles in his time. And the Greek people took a real man and made him into a demigod and started worshipping Hercules. Alexander the Great, even a more recent figure. And I say recent when I refer to this, history coming forward. Who was he? He was a person in his time, actually even in his time, they made temples and worshipped him. And then later on, he was worshipped for a certain time period because of the great feats that he did, Alexander the Great. The story of Rama and Sita in the Hindu tradition, the same story there too. It was a real person. And eventually, they deified him. The Roman Caesars, the same way. Every time a Roman emperor died, they deified him and made a temple, and people would go worship them. So it's a very interesting thing, as a discussion in itself. But one thing we need to, like I said, remember, and this is salvation, is through Allah and Allah alone. And through no one, through no intercession, can we be given salvation. And any intercession that is given on Yawm al-Qiyamah, on the Day of Judgment, is by His will. So in the end, I wanted to conclude with the idea that, time is of the essence. And this Ramadan, we had this time. In these last 10 days is a concentration on saving ourselves from the fire. And what beautiful moment, other than the most beautiful of moments in this month, is Laylatul Qadr. And inshallah we find it and we take that opportunity. That is better than 1,000 months. And I refer a saying, a hadith of Hanzala radiyallahu anh, in this aspect of time and essence of it. One time there's a companion of the Rasulullah, Hanzala, and he was crying and he was reflecting, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he came upon him. He said, "Oh Hanzala, why you look upset and stuff?" And Hanzala says that, I think I've become a hypocrite. And Abu Bakr says, "What makes you think that?" So Hanzala says, by Allah, when we are with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we talk about all these things, and it reminds of Jannah and hellfire, and it's as if we're looking at it. It's like right before us. But then when we leave, we get distracted by our wives and children and livelihood, and we forget about that. And so I think that in this sense, I'm a hypocrite. And so Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, the character of this man, he's like, man, you're right. I feel the same way. So both of them became upset, and they walked towards Prophet ﷺ and they said, Ya Allah, Ya Rasulullah's messenger, we have become hypocrites. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's messenger, he says, what makes you say that? And so they respond that, when we're with you, we feel like, and talking to you, and we can see paradise and hell, like as if it's before us, and the angels are coming. And then when we leave, we just got caught up in the dunya. So then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, by He in whose hands is my life, if you were to continue in that state that you were with me, verily the angels would come down and shake your hands with you in your bed and in your streets. But Hanzala, there is but time. there is but time. There is but time. And he repeated this 3 times. And so I tell people this hadith, one of the lessons in there is that there is time. And time is with us, and Allah has given us time. You know, there's a surah in the Quran, wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Consider the flight of time. Verily man is at a loss, unless he be of those who have faith, who do good works, who enjoin upon keeping to the truth, and who enjoin upon being one another to patience and in adversity. And on that note, we reflect that we are at a loss of time. We are at a loss of time. You can't gain what is past. You only have but the present. The future, Allah knows what's going to happen. But you only have the present. That's why it's a gift from God. And it's called the present. So don't procrastinate until the moment when your last breath is right here in your throat, because then it'll be too late. So make yourself worthy by committing good a'mal, having good niyyah, having good idea of Allah, as we spoke also, and inshallah, God willing, through His grace, we will be given Jannah and salvation from the fire. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.